can this $1 3D print replace an $80 phone case? That's exactly the question we're going to answer today. And I'm not only going to show you what TPU can really do, we're also answering the question whether you can 3D print your own shoes. I tested a ton of different TPU variations today and probably found the coolest TPU ever. But let's go back to the beginning, the year 2023. Oh, at the end I have an announcement that will change this channel forever. So stick around until the end. So a long time ago I bought my first roll of TPU and started experimenting with it. Back then I already printed a phone case, but it worked semi-well. Now in 2026 I wanted to give the whole TPU topic another chance, but this time do it properly. 3D printing has changed massively. Not just the printer but also the filaments. So TPU is always rated with a so-called shore hardness. Shore hardness tells you how hard or soft a different material is. So in other words, how easily it can be indented. It's measured with a device called durometer. A spring-loaded needle is pressed into the material, and the deeper it goes, the softer the material is. The scale runs from 0, extremely soft, to 100, really hard. That's why when you buy TPU, there's usually a label like 85A. Anyway, I actually still have the roll of TPU I used back then. Let's just start with that. With TPU, it's extremely important that you dry it properly. So I just threw it in the dryer, and in the meantime I thought about what I can print with it. So before we get into the phone case, you've probably seen people 3D printing their own shoes on social media, and I thought to myself, is this possible? Are they comfortable? So let's just try it out. I found these cool sandals and just started to print. Unfortunately it failed, but no problem, because in the meantime a super interesting package arrived, this TPU. And it's not a normal one. We've talked about the shore hardness, and that's exactly what makes this TPU so special. It doesn't have a fixed shore hardness. Depending on how hot you print it and what flow rate you use, you get a different hardness. I printed these 3 cubes to visualize this. Here you can see that all the cubes have a different hardness depending on how I printed them. So now I could think, what hardness do I want my shoes to be? And I choose the middle one, so let's start the print with these settings. What can I say? It looks better, but it's still not perfect. We've got a ton of stringing, and I wouldn't place my feet in this thing there. So I switched brands again, this time to Extruder. They make relatively expensive filament, but I thought if this doesn't work with it, it won't work with anything. I've got the Flex Semi and Mediasoft here, plus a roll of a very special material that we will use in a moment to print probably the coolest phone case ever. This time the print worked really well, but unfortunately the material was too hard and it was so uncomfortable on my feet. So I printed it again with the semi-soft material. By the way, this takes a very long time. Each shoe takes around 30 hours to complete. Like I said, I printed it now with the other TPU, but to be honest, it's still very uncomfortable and I wouldn't wear it outside. My conclusion on 3D printing shoes are pretty meh, but that's also down to the process. There are companies that specialize in this and do it properly. I mean, there are a lot of advantages when you 3D print your shoes because you can design new designs pretty quickly. But these companies don't use the regular 3D printer, they use really expensive machines. By the way, if you ever need something from a very expensive printer at home, that's no problem. With PCBWay, you just upload your 3D model and choose your process. They really have every single one you would ever need. For example, I had this in Solve made on an SLS printer and you can see the quality is amazing. They're currently celebrating their birthday, so check out the first link in the description. One thing I noticed, A lot of people ask me what's the difference between a 20 bucks and a 40 bucks TPU. That's a question I get really often. It comes down to three things. First, tolerance. Cheap filaments varies in diameter, and especially with TPU that immediately leads to clogs and ugly prints. Second, good filament comes vacuum sealed and probably dry. But whether you buy an expensive or a cheap filament, you should always dry your filament if it's TPU, ABS or something like this. And third, this is my opinion, expensive filament lasts significantly longer. I have a 10 euro filament that was just lying around, and after a year or so it was completely brittle. But other expensive materials still worked after like 3 years. Anyway, let's move on to a topic that was on my mind for 3 years now. 3D printed phone cases. I tried it myself, but I was never convinced. I even saw it on a lot of YouTube videos, but I always thought to myself, this don't look good. A while ago I bought this phone case here for 80 bucks. Is that a waste of money? I don't know. Everyone has to decide for themselves. But the selling point is that it's made of polycarbonate and carbon fibers. So when I was on the extruder website and saw a filament called FlexCF, so a TPU reinforced with carbon fibers, I knew exactly what to do. First, I printed these two phone cases with a normal TPU. And I have to be honest, they're already a lot better than my phone case 3 years ago. So I think you can see the progress already here. By the way, I'm printing everything today on my Prusa Core 1 Plus. Because a long-term review is coming soon and I really want to test this printer with everything I got. If you're interested in a long-term review, feel free to subscribe to this channel. But before we can now print with FlexCF, there's one super important thing to do. You can't just print CF filaments with any printer. You need a so-called hardened steel nozzle, and the Prusa Core 1 Plus doesn't have one. So first we had to swap the nozzle. For that I printed this tool here, we put it on the printhead, loosen the screws on the side, and now we can release the nozzle and change it. So now let's start the printer. So this is a 3D printed phone case reinforced with carbon fibers. I have to say I'm pretty proud of this creation. But we have a 3D printer, so now let's personalize it. For one, I love these honeycomb patterns. So we set the infill to honeycomb, increase the infill length so the honeycombs are bigger, and set the top and bottom layers to 0 so you can see the infill. I also enabled fuzzy skin so we get this texture. I just hope the phone still fits in. As a final step, I added my name at the bottom as an engraving. Anyway, here is the finished print. It looks amazing, especially because it's sturdy but still flexible. That's basically the best of both worlds, and the texture is just wonderful. By the way, I have an announcement to make. I've always filmed all my videos in my room. So you need to know one thing. I'm originally a German 3D printing YouTuber, and I think I'm now 4 years into the game. And now I got this huge industrial hall where I can now produce all my videos. I have to quickly thank you, because without you this would have never been possible. A detailed video about it is coming. Feel free to leave a follow, and thank you for everything.